The culturally diverse landscape of India is now connected like never before. Digital devices have changed the way we communicate and the way we work. From village classrooms to virtual classrooms. From instant money transfers to online shopping. From satellite launches to telemedical facilities. And from back-end offices to building IT empires. Information and communication technologies have transformed the lives of millions of Indians. October 6, 2014. Satellite images come into the Indian Meteorological Department or IMD. They catch the attention of the Cyclone Warning Division. A major cyclone is moving towards the eastern coast of India.
We expected that it will become a cyclone and it will move northwestwards towards east coast of India, that is Andhra Pradesh and Odisha coast.
12th October 2014. Merely 6 days after the IMD received satellite warnings, the eastern coast of India is lashed by Cyclone Hudur.
We predicted the storm surge of about 1 to 2 meters above the astronomical tide at the time of landfall. We predicted on the 7th itself that system will become a very severe cyclone storm. The maximum intensity of the wind at the time of landfall will be 170 to 180 kilometers per hour, gusting to 195 kilometers per hour.
It is as severe as expected, but the aftermath is not even remotely as destructive as its 1999 predecessor. Disaster management authorities are well prepared. Only 46 casualties are reported. So what made the difference between 1999 and 2014? A major factor was satellite warning system enabled by the INSAT 3D. As the INSAT 3D satellite orbits the Earth, it captures images of weather systems moving over land and sea.
Satellite plays a dominant role for monitoring of the cyclones because cyclone develops over the sea surface. So in the deep sea, there is no major observations except the satellite.
Satellite and supercomputer technology helped save thousands of lives from Cyclone Hudur. It's just one example of how advanced computing technologies are helping India progress. Today, there are few parts of modern India that are untouched by information and communication technologies or ICT. And while it may seem as if this ICT revolution is a 21st century phenomenon, the story is nearly as old as India. The 1950s. A newly independent India was tasked with building its foundations from the ground up. Amongst the most important was building industry and modernizing. The key to that was tapping into the latest phenomenon sweeping the world, data processing machines. Although these machines were some of the earliest computers, they looked very different from how they look today. Data processing machines were large analog computers. These analog computers calculated mathematical problems by converting data, like numbers, into measurable physical phenomena, like voltage, temperature, or pressure. These computers are designed to use changes in their quantities, example, temperature differences, to find the solution, which is then converted back to numerical data. It was these data processing machines that were the most prevalent until the 1940s. When the Second World War took place, the war accelerated the development of such machines. Computers were needed to create war strategies, like cracking complex mathematical codes made by the enemy. In 1944, the British built the first electronic data processing machine called Colossus. It was used to break encrypted German military communications. But that was not the only thing it was famous for. Colossus also happened to be a digital computer. Digital computers are different from analog computers. Simply put, while analog computers measure, digital computers count. Instead of using physical quantities to represent numerical data, they use electronic on-off impulses that represent combinations of 1 and 0. In other words, digital computers use binary code to calculate the solution. While the Colossus was helping the British Army gain over the Germans, back in India, the new nation's first government was taking note. Without computers, India would not be able to keep pace with the rest of the world. But the newly independent nation was strapped for resources. It was not just cash poor, it also lacked the industrial strength to build the kind of machines the West was building. The lack of computing infrastructure significantly slowed the progress in fields of science and technology. It also slowed progress in critical fields needed for the governance of India, like the National Survey of India, a census that relied heavily on the data-rich science of statistics. Since the 1930s, Calcutta had been home to the Indian Statistical Institute, or ISI. Founded by stalwarts like P.C. Mahalanobis, the institute was critical to building some of young India's first national surveys that were used by the Planning Commission. This included the population census, and it required big number crunching. In 1955, while working on the second plan, Professor P.C. Mahalanobis was deep within just such a problem, which couldn't be solved by mechanical desk calculators alone. The professor knew he needed something far more powerful, like a data processing machine that had been built by the British company BTM and was called HEC-2M. The HEC-2M was not just India's but also Asia's first digital computer, and it was bought at the princely sum of 10 lakh rupees. It was a massive number crunching machine that went on to become the backbone of India's Planning Commission. Although Professor Mahalanobis knew that India could advance by importing machines from USSR and the US, its future did not lie only in foreign-made machines alone. And he wasn't the only one who had this idea. Across the country, in Bombay, one of India's most noted scientists, Homi Bhabha, shared the same vision.
Even early in experimental nuclear physics work, it was clear that there was need for complex, sophisticated instrumentation. Dr. Bhabha's philosophy was, to the maximum extent, to depend on local technology, local innovation, rather than blindly import.
Bhabha, who was the founder of the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research, or TIFR, built a very special team of scientists and innovators. This team was tasked with building India's first digital computer from scratch. This computer would assist in the critical task of performing all the computing analytics for India to build its own nuclear reactor. It took TIFR's team nearly 6 years of hits and trials to design a completely indigenous computer.
We started building modules, subsystems, and so on, using the little information that was available in the very few technical journals at that time. And then wherever information was not there, we reinvented the wheel. The nice thing about reinventing a wheel is that sometimes you come up with a somewhat better wheel.
This better wheel was called the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research Automatic Calculator, or TIFRAC. And by 1960, it was ready. It was the first of its kind not just in India but Asia. The TIFF rack was as huge as 15 steel cupboards arranged back to back. This massive setup was required to house vacuum tubes. Today's computers come equipped with many gigabytes of memory. But in 1960, the TIFF rack's memory had a capacity of just 1 kilobyte, and it could process just about 1024 words. Yet, it was hailed as one of the fastest computers of its time. Faster even than the first generation IBM computer, IBM 701.
We built a core memory system which was absolutely contemporary at that time, and we built a cathode tube display system for the display of text information and graphical information.
TIFF rack soon became a much sought after computer. It was used in a wide variety of research, from space science at ISRO to nuclear physics at BARC.
Something like 60 different organizations came and used the computer facilities that were in TIFR. And in order to make this possible, TIFR staff organized courses on computer awareness, on computer programming, and so on. So the effort at one go established computer technology in this country. It proved that we could make computers which stood their own in comparison with contemporary machines at that time.
Meanwhile, back at ISI, Calcutta, engineers had built the ECU, a completely indigenous computer that was not only helping it solve statistical problems, it was also helping to train India's first generation of computer experts. By the end of the 1960s, India had overcome serious challenges and emerged with indigenous computers, a feat not many countries could claim. It was fast gaining proficiency in building sophisticated hardware. But in order to truly master computing technology, Indians would have to build capability in a critical field, software. What exactly is the relationship between computer hardware and software? Hardware includes all the physical and material components of the computer. One can think of it like the human brain, which is a mass of muscle and nerve cells. The software is what constitutes intelligence. It gives us the system by which hardware components can operate, process data, and solve complex problems. Academic institutions like the Indian Institute of Technology, or IIT, were the first to take on this challenge. For the first time, Indian engineers were learning how to code, which meant using special computing languages to write programs that hardware could run on.
In the 80s, also, IIT Kanpur started the first B.Tech program, an undergraduate program in computer science. And there are many computer scientists in the world today who are at the cutting edge, who are products of these IITs.
Institutes like IIT Kanpur trained its budding software professionals by exposing them to the best technologies of its time. Even as batch upon batch of software professionals was being rolled out from Indian academic institutes, there was a paradox emerging. Domestic demand for their skills, especially in the Indian private sector, did not match up to the supply of qualified software engineers. Around the world, the need for software specialists was rising quickly, and that became the turning point for India's IT revolution. After the break, we will see how India created a whole new industry by becoming the back office of the world. Today, India can count itself as one of the most significant players in global information and communication technology, or ICT. This has only been possible because of scientific visionaries who through the 1950s, 60s and 70s built the foundations of computing excellence. In the 1970s, public policy for computing began to emerge. This is when the Government of India established the Department of Electronics, or DOE, and the National Informatics Centre, etc. In the 1980s and 90s, India's expertise expanded to encompass software development.
We have been very good at software development, at theoretical computer science. In a sense, the Indian mindset seems to be particularly suited to working on those, partly by intent and partly because of the situation that existed worldwide. We found a niche for ourselves.
Although the software development phase began in India's classrooms, it soon attracted corporate India. With the advent of companies like Infosys, Wipro, and Tata Consulting Services, Indian software transformed from an academic pursuit into an industry.
They started setting up the standards, systems, processes, converting into an industrial activity, so that it's not just one brilliant programmer sitting in a corner somewhere and writing up brilliant programs, but hundreds of engineers working together to develop a large solution.
Slowly but steadily, other companies too set up shop in countries that were on the fast track to computerizing, like the United States of America. And then the internet came along. Today, we can't imagine life without the internet. It has changed the way we communicate and function in the modern world. But back in the 1990s, the internet was still coming into its own, especially in India. Amongst the first to recognize the power of the web were scientific institutions like the Indian Space Research Organisation, or ISRO, and the Centre for Development of Telematics, or CDOT. They built some of the earliest infrastructure for internet-based communication.
Through a satellite and submarine cable, you can connect a computer here to a computer there. So you can be sitting on your computer here and working and sending an application which goes almost instantly to the computer sitting in Chicago or in New York or Tokyo. Groundwork which was done by ISRO and CDOT in a short period of time helped India make use of these new global networks.
The internet created not just local but global networks. As a consequence, India's software industry experienced a boom, and the term BPO began popping up everywhere. BPO stands for Business Process Outsourcing. But what exactly is it? It's when a company gives a particular task to an outside organization, service provider. For example, customer service for a product. Sitting in India, BPO executives could respond to queries and provide solutions to clients halfway across the world. As India became a hot BPO destination, it opened up a whole new job market. As meteoric as this rise was, it wasn't enough simply to be the world's back office. IT was now driving India's economy. The scene was primed for the advent of Software Technology Parks, or STPI. STPI is a virtual window through which India exports software to the rest of the world. For most of us, exports would mean any material physically shipped across to another country. Through STPI, software exports were done via satellite data links. That would mean digital exports that travel literally at the speed of light. Until then, the concept of virtual exports was unheard of in India.
It was seamless, processing of their request of export and import and monitoring and administering them. They never knew that STPI was really regulating them. And that was the work culture, the style of functioning that STPI adopted became a great enabler for the software industry to grow to this extent.
Not only did STPI set up a seamless system for exporting digital products, it also led to a budding culture of technology startup companies. Through STPI, these startups could easily export their products and as a consequence grow their business. Liberalization policies and gateways like STPI fueled a growth that would place India firmly on the global ICT map. By the end of the 1990s, India's ICT revolution had created a thriving IT industry. The private sector was booming thanks to a large foreign market for its services. But what about the domestic need for ICT services and products? And would India be satisfied being just a back office of the world? Find out after the break. In the new millennium, the world is driven by information and communication technologies, or ICT. While the developing nations in the West have been riding the information superhighway from the early days, India is one of the rare developing nations that made a big mark, especially in the field of software development. Through the 90s, Indian software companies experienced massive growth, especially in the foreign market, becoming a $100 billion industry and the third largest software exporter in the world.
People have a respect for Indians. They believe in Indian software. And that is why they come to us.
Paradoxically, the domestic demand for software industry was limited, and many joked that the Indian IT and BPO professionals were no more than cyber coolies, providing low-end services at cheap costs. Most critically, ICT needed to realize its biggest potential within India itself, solving the country's complex and massive problems. That's when the National Informatics Centre, or NIC, was brought in. Initially, the NIC was established to build online infrastructure for government agencies. But in the 21st century, it has emerged as a pioneer of internet-based public services run by the Indian government. Today, it has transformed many governance systems by bringing them onto the digital platform. For example, it has led the drive to computerize each of the 600+ district-level government offices in India. As for the cyber coolie tag, India has decisively broken the stereotype. In 2014, the Indian IT industry generated revenue of $118 billion, and nearly 10 lakh professionals work in the IT industry, both in India and abroad.
Indian IT has grown so many-fold, and they are doing extremely large projects, which are globally pioneering projects, some of them in India and some of them abroad. So India has created a brand of its own.
Perhaps the biggest achievement has been in the way information and communication technology has impacted the lives of the common man. Today, nearly 150 million Indians are using the internet to stay connected. As for the future, when 1 billion+ people are e-powered to connect with anyone from anywhere, that would truly be India's digital revolution. Please send your suggestions and comments to Vigyan Prasar, A50, Institutional Area, Sector 62, Noida, 201309. You can also email us at info@vigyanprasar.gov.in.